The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop in front of the sprawling ranch house, throwing Margaret Owens against the wooden frame hard enough to bruise her shoulder. And she knew in that instant her carefully constructed plans for a brief, forgettable visit were about to unravel in ways she could never have anticipated. Dust billowed around the wheels as Margaret gathered her carpet bag and stepped down onto the hard, packed earth of New Mexico territory. The year was 1883, and Piñon was 3 days' ride from Santa Fe, a place so remote it barely warranted a dot on most maps. The ranch before her stretched endlessly in all directions, a kingdom of cattle, horses, and wild grassland that seemed to swallow the horizon whole. "Miss Owens." A deep voice cut through the afternoon heat. She turned to find a man standing on the porch of the main house, tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of sage in winter. He wore worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, and a look of cautious curiosity that made her suddenly conscious of her travel-stained dress and wind-blown hair. "Yes, you must be Nathan Quinn." She walked forward, extending her hand in what she hoped was a businesslike manner. "Thank you for agreeing to let me stay while I settle my aunt's affairs." Nathan stepped down from the porch and took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip firm but careful. "My condolences about your aunt. Sarah was a good woman. We all miss her in these parts." Margaret's throat tightened. She had not seen Aunt Sarah in 15 years, not since she was a child of 8 visiting from Boston. The letter from the territorial attorney had arrived 6 weeks ago, informing her that Sarah had passed and left Margaret a small property adjacent to the Quinn Ranch. The will stipulated that Margaret must come in person to claim it, assess its value, and decide whether to keep or sell. She had planned to stay 2 weeks, perhaps 3 at most, conduct her business, and return to her position as a schoolteacher in Massachusetts. "The attorney in Santa Fe said you'd offered accommodations," Margaret said, withdrawing her hand. "I want you to know I can pay for my room and board." "I would not want to impose." Nathan's expression softened slightly. "Your aunt was good to this ranch, to my family. When my mother was dying of fever 10 years back, Sarah sat with her every night for 2 weeks, would not take a penny or a word of thanks. So no, Miss Owens, you will not be paying me anything. Consider it a debt repaid." Before Margaret could argue, a younger man came around the side of the house leading her trunk on his shoulder as if it weighed nothing. He had sandy hair and a quick grin that transformed his weathered face. "That's Cole, my foreman," Nathan said. "Cole, this is Miss Margaret Owens, Sarah Whitfield's niece." "Pleasure, miss." Cole tipped his hat and carried the trunk inside without further comment. Nathan gestured toward the house. "You must be tired. I will show you to your room. We keep ranch hours here, which means suppers at 6 and breakfast at 5. If that's too early for city folk, I can have something kept warm for you." Margaret bristled at city folk but swallowed her retort. She needed his hospitality, at least temporarily. 5 will be fine. "I am an early riser." The interior of the ranch house surprised her. She had expected rough-hewn logs and bare necessities, but instead found polished wood floors, comfortable furniture, and details that spoke of a woman's touch, even though Nathan had mentioned his mother passed a decade ago. Curtains hung in the windows, books lined a shelf near the fireplace, and everything was clean without being fussy. "My mother loved this house," Nathan said, following her gaze. "I have tried to keep it the way she would have wanted. Your room is upstairs, second door on the right." Margaret climbed the stairs, aware of Nathan following behind with her smaller bag. The room he showed her was simple but pleasant, with a brass bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a porcelain pitcher and basin, and a window that looked out over the corral and the mountains beyond. "Thank you, Mr. Quinn. This is more than adequate." "Nathan," he corrected. "We do not stand much on formality out here, and if you need anything, just ask. I will leave you to rest." He closed the door quietly behind him, and Margaret sank onto the bed, suddenly exhausted. The journey from Boston had taken 2 weeks, involving trains, another stage coach from St. Louis, and finally the rough trek across New Mexico territory. Every bone in her body ached, and the altitude made her head swim slightly. She forced herself to rise and unpack her few belongings, hanging her 2 spare dresses in the wardrobe and arranging her toilet items on the washstand. The water in the pitcher was fresh and cool, and she washed her face and hands, finger-combed her chestnut hair, and changed into a clean dress of deep green calico that her friend Emma had insisted made her eyes look like emeralds. At precisely 6 o'clock, Margaret made her way downstairs, following the sound of male voices and the smell of something savory. The dining room held a long table that could seat 12, though only 3 places were set. Nathan stood when she entered, as did Cole. "I hope you do not mind eating with the hands," Nathan said. "Most of the men eat in the bunkhouse, but Cole usually joins me and a few others come and go." "I do not mind at all." Margaret took the chair Nathan indicated, accepting a plate of beef stew, fresh bread, and green beans that looked like they had come from a garden. The food was simple but delicious, and Margaret realized she was ravenous. For several minutes, no one spoke, focused on their meals. Then Cole asked, "How was Boston when you left, miss? I have always wanted to see a real city." "Crowded," Margaret said with a small smile, "and noisy. There are streetcars now running on tracks down the main avenues and buildings going up that are 5 and 6 stories tall." "It is very different from this." "You teach there?" Nathan asked. "I noticed you had several books in your trunk, educational texts." "Yes, I teach at a girls' school, reading, writing, mathematics, and a bit of history. I have been there for 3 years since I finished my own schooling." Nathan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We could use a teacher in Pinyon. The children have to ride 8 miles to the next town for any proper education, and most families cannot spare them that much time away from chores." "I am only here temporarily," Margaret said quickly. "Once I settle my aunt's estate, I will be returning to Boston." Something flickered in Nathan's eyes, but he only said, "Of course. But while you are here, if you wanted to visit the school in town, I am sure they would appreciate meeting you. The teacher there is an old man named Mr. Hendricks, and he could use some new ideas." After supper, Nathan offered to show Margaret around the ranch before darkness fell. They walked out into the cooling evening air, and he pointed out the various buildings: the bunkhouse, the barn, the stable, the chicken coop, the smokehouse, and a dozen other structures that made the ranch a self-sufficient operation. "How long have you been running this place?" Margaret asked as they paused by the corral fence. Several horses grazed nearby, their coats gleaming in the fading light. "My father started it 30 years ago, back in '53. He came out here when this was still just a territory in dispute, claimed the land, and built it up from nothing. I was born here in '61, learned to ride before I could properly walk. When my father died 7 years ago, it fell to me. I have been running it ever since." "Do you have siblings?" "A sister, Lydia. She married a merchant in Denver 3 years back. I do not see her much, but we write. She has 2 children now and seems happy enough." Nathan paused, then added, "What about you? Any family besides your aunt? My parents died when I was 14. Yellow fever. I went to live with my father's cousin in Boston, and she saw to my education. She passed 2 years ago, so there is no one left now." Margaret was surprised at how easily the words came. She usually kept such information to herself. "I am sorry. That must have been hard, losing everyone." It was. Margaret looked out at the darkening landscape, the mountains turning purple in the distance. "But I have made a life for myself. A good one." Nathan was quiet for a moment, then said, "Your aunt's property is about 2 miles east of here. It is not large, maybe 40 acres, but there is a decent house on it and a barn. Sarah kept some chickens and a milk cow, grew a vegetable garden. She lived simply but well. I have been checking on it since she passed, making sure everything stays in good repair. I can take you there tomorrow if you like." "Thank you. That would be helpful." Margaret turned to face him in the gathering dusk. "Mr. Quinn, Nathan, I want to be clear. I appreciate your hospitality, but I do not want you to feel obligated beyond the basics. I am quite capable of taking care of myself." Nathan's expression was unreadable in the shadows. "I do not doubt that, Miss Owens, but out here we look after each other. It is how we survive. So if I seem overly helpful, it is not because I think you are incapable. It is just how things are done." They walked back to the house in companionable silence, and Margaret retired early, her body still adjusting to the journey and the new surroundings. She lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to the sounds of the ranch settling for the night. Horses nickering, the distant howl of a coyote, the creak of wood as the house cooled. Despite her exhaustion, sleep was slow to come, and when it finally did, she dreamed of mountains and endless sky. The next morning, Margaret woke before dawn to the sound of roosters and men's voices in the yard. She dressed quickly in her most practical dress, a brown cotton with minimal trim, and made her way downstairs to find Nathan already at the table with coffee and biscuits. "Good morning," he said, rising. "I hope the noise did not wake you too early." "Not at all. I told you I am an early riser." Margaret accepted a cup of coffee and a plate of biscuits with butter and honey. The coffee was strong and hot, exactly what she needed. "I thought we could ride out to your aunt's place after breakfast," Nathan said. "I have a mare that is gentle but has good stamina. Can you ride?" "I could when I was younger, but it has been years." "It will come back to you. Like anything else worth knowing, you do not really forget." An hour later, Margaret found herself mounted on a bay mare named Copper, following Nathan on a large black gelding across the range eland. Her body remembered the rhythm of riding better than her mind expected, and soon she relaxed into the gentle rocking motion, watching the landscape unfold around her. The land here was different from anything in Boston, vast and open under a sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. Sage and pinon dotted the rolling hills, and in the distance, the Sangre de Cristo Mountains rose like ancient sentinels. The air smelled of sun-warmed earth and growing things, and despite everything, Margaret felt something in her chest loosen, some tightness she had not realized she carried. "There," Nathan said, pointing ahead to where a small house came into view, surrounded by a rail fence and a few outbuildings. "That is Sarah's place." As they drew closer, Margaret could see the house was well built, with a covered porch and real glass windows. The barn was smaller than Nathan's but sturdy, and the garden, though overgrown, showed signs of careful planning. They dismounted, and Nathan held the gate open for her. Margaret walked slowly up to the house, aware of Nathan following at a respectful distance. The door was unlocked, and inside, everything was neat and tidy, covered with sheets to protect against dust. "I had my housekeeper, Mrs. Davies, come out and cover things after Sarah passed," Nathan explained. "I did not know how long it would be before you could come." Margaret walked through the small house, taking in the simple furniture, the iron stove, the shelf of books that included some of the same titles she had loved as a child. In the bedroom, She found a trunk at the foot of the bed, and when she opened it, her breath caught. Inside were quilts, linens, and at the very bottom, a bundle of letters tied with ribbon. Margaret picked them up and saw they were addressed to her, letters her aunt had written over the years but apparently never sent. Her vision blurred with sudden tears. "I will be outside," Nathan said quietly, and left her alone. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed and untied the ribbon with shaking fingers. The first letter was dated 15 years ago, just after Margaret's last visit. In her aunt's careful handwriting, Sarah had written about how much she enjoyed having a child in the house again, how she hoped Margaret would come back someday, how she had watched her niece ride away in the wagon with a heavy heart. Letter after letter told the story of Sarah's lonely life, her regrets about not staying closer to family, her hope that Margaret would find happiness. The last letter, dated just weeks before her death, spoke of the property and her wish that Margaret might consider making a life here in this wild and beautiful place. Margaret pressed the letters to her chest and allowed herself to cry, mourning not just her aunt's death but all the years they had lost, all the visits that never happened, all the words left unsaid. When she finally emerged from the house, her eyes were red, but she felt oddly lighter, as if some weight had been lifted. Nathan was waiting by the horses, his hat in his hands. "Are you all right?" "Yes, I found letters. She wrote to me over the years but never sent them." Margaret's voice was steady despite the emotion churning inside her. "She wanted me to stay here, to make this place my home." Nathan replaced his hat and met her eyes. "What do you want?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Margaret thought of Boston, of her small room in the boarding house, of her students who came from wealthy families and looked at her as just another servant. She thought of the polite but distant colleagues, the narrow streets crowded with strangers, the constant noise and press of people. Then she looked at the mountains, the endless sky, the little house that her aunt had loved, and Nathan's steady gaze waiting patiently for her answer. "I do not know yet," she admitted. "I need time to think." "That is fair enough. Take all the time you need." They rode back to the ranch in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, not awkward. When they arrived, Nathan had work to do, and Margaret spent the afternoon exploring the main house, reading one of the books from the shelf and helping Mrs. Davies, the housekeeper who came 3 days a week, with preparations for supper. Mrs. Davies was a widow in her 50s with iron-gray hair and a no-nonsense manner that Margaret immediately appreciated. "It is good to have another woman in this house," she declared while kneading bread dough. "Mr. Quinn is a good man, but he works too hard and never thinks about himself. His mother used to worry he would turn into an old bachelor, married to this ranch and nothing else." "Has he never courted anyone?" Margaret asked, immediately wondering why she cared. "Oh, there have been women who tried. The banker's daughter in Santa Fe made quite a play for him a few years back, but Nathan was not interested. He said she looked at the ranch like it was a prize to be won, not a life to be lived. He wants someone who understands this place, who loves it like he does." Mrs. Davies gave Margaret a knowing look. Not many women are willing to give up comfort and society for ranching life. Margaret thought about that conversation through supper and into the evening. After the meal, she sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Nathan joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Mind some company?" "Not at all." Margaret accepted the coffee and made room for him on the bench. They sat in silence for a while, watching the colors deepen and fade. Finally, Nathan said, "I want you to know, Miss Owens, Margaret, that you are welcome to stay here as long as you need. And if you decide to keep your aunt's property, I will help you get it running again. But if you decide to sell and go back to Boston, I will help with that too. No strings attached." Margaret turned to look at him. In the fading light, his profile was strong and honest, and she realized with a start that she trusted this man she had known for barely a day. "Why are you being so kind to me?" Nathan was quiet for a moment, then said, "Your aunt was kind to my mother when we needed it most. And beyond that, I suppose I see something in you, a strength and a sadness mixed together, and I understand it. I lost both my parents, same as you. I know what it is to feel alone in the world, even when you are surrounded by people. And I guess I would like to think that if I needed help, someone would offer it without expecting anything in return." "Thank you," Margaret said softly. "That means more than you know." The days began to settle into a pattern. Margaret rose early and helped Mrs. Davies with breakfast, then spent her mornings exploring the ranch or riding out to her aunt's property. Nathan was often busy with ranch work, but he made time each day to check on her, to answer her questions about the land and the livestock, to share stories about the area and its people. In the afternoons, Margaret would read or write letters to her few friends back in Boston. She found herself describing the landscape in detail, trying to capture the way the light changed throughout the day, the vastness of the sky, the strange beauty of the high desert. She wrote about Nathan too, though she kept those descriptions brief and factual, not wanting to reveal even to herself how often her thoughts turned to the rancher. On her fourth day at the ranch, Nathan took her into Pinyon, a small town consisting of a general store, a saloon, a church, a tiny schoolhouse, and a handful of houses. The trip took 2 hours by wagon, and Margaret used the time to ask Nathan questions about running a ranch. "The key is water," he explained as they rolled along the rutted road. "This land looks empty, but it can support cattle if you know where the water is and how to manage your grazing. My father spent years learning the water sources, and he taught me everything. That knowledge is worth more than gold out here. What about crops? Could I grow anything besides a kitchen garden? Some hay, maybe oats for the horses. The growing season is short because of the altitude, and you never know when a late freeze might kill everything. Most folks out here focus on livestock, cattle or sheep, sometimes horses. Your aunt had a few chickens and that milk cow, and she sold eggs and butter to folks in town, made a decent living at it, enough for her needs." In Pinyon, Nathan introduced Margaret to everyone they met. The owner of the general store, Mr. Parker, was a rotund man with a jovial manner who insisted on giving Margaret a peppermint stick for being Sarah's kin. The school teacher, Mr. Hendricks, was indeed elderly, probably past 70, and his eyes lit up when Nathan mentioned that Margaret taught in Boston. "Oh, you must come speak to my students," he exclaimed. "They would be so excited to hear about the East. Most of them have never been farther than Santa Fe." Margaret found herself agreeing, and they arranged for her to visit the school the following week. As they left, Nathan said, "Old Hendricks has been talking about retiring for 3 years now, but there is no one to replace him. The town cannot afford much of a salary, and most qualified teachers do not want to come this far out. How much do they pay? $30 a month plus room and board. The teacher lives in a small house behind the church. It is not much, but it is honest work." Margaret did not respond, but the information lodged in her mind alongside everything else she was learning about this place. That evening, after supper, Nathan asked if she would like to see the horses up close. He led her to the corral where several young horses were being trained. Cole was working with a gray mare, getting her used to a saddle, and he tipped his hat when they approached. "This is Juniper," Nathan said, gesturing to a pretty chestnut filly with a white blaze. "She is 2 years old, just starting her training. She has good bloodlines, smart and willing. My father bred her line from stock he brought from Texas. Margaret reached out slowly, and the filly sniffed her hand, then allowed herself to be stroked. "She is beautiful. Would you like to help train her?" Nathan's question surprised her. "I do not know anything about training horses." "I could teach you, if you are interested." Margaret met his eyes and saw the offer for what it was, not just about horses but about connection, about learning to be part of this place. "I would like that." So began a new pattern. Each morning after breakfast, Margaret would spend an hour with Nathan and Juniper, learning how to work with the young horse. Nathan was a patient teacher, demonstrating techniques, and then stepping back to let Margaret try, offering gentle corrections when needed. "Horses respond to confidence and consistency," he explained one morning as Margaret worked on getting Juniper to accept a bridle. "They need to trust you, and trust comes from you being reliable, calm, and clear in what you want." "That sounds like teaching children," Margaret said with a smile. "I suppose it is. Both require patience and understanding that every individual is different. What works for one might not work for another." As they worked, they talked. Nathan told her about growing up on the ranch, about the struggles his father faced in the early years, about his mother's determination to create a real home in the wilderness. He spoke of his sister and her children, of his hope that someday he would have a family of his own to pass the ranch to. Margaret shared stories about her childhood in Philadelphia before her parents died, about the difficult years adjusting to life with her father's cousin, about her decision to become a teacher. She found herself confessing her loneliness in Boston, her sense of going through the motions of a life without really living it. "I think that is what drew me to teaching," she said one morning while brushing Juniper's coat. "The girls are so full of life and possibility. Being around them reminds me that the world is bigger than my small corner of it." "And yet you came out here to an even smaller corner." Margaret paused, considering. "It feels different, though. Boston is small because it is confined, crowded. Here the world feels vast. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Nathan's smile was warm. "I have been to cities. Denver, St. Louis. I always feel like I cannot breathe properly until I get back to open sky." The day of her visit to the school arrived, and Margaret dressed in her most professional attire, a navy dress with a white collar. Nathan drove her into town in the wagon, and Mr. Hendricks greeted them at the schoolhouse door. Inside, 24 children ranging from ages 6 to 16 sat on rough benches, their faces eager and curious. Margaret spent 2 hours with them, talking about Boston, about her teaching, about the wider world beyond New Mexico territory. She was impressed by their intelligence and their questions, by the hunger for knowledge that shone in their eyes despite the rustic surroundings. After the children were dismissed for lunch, Mr. Hendricks invited Margaret and Nathan to his small house for coffee. "You have a gift with young people," he said to Margaret. They were transfixed. "I have not seen them that engaged in months. They are good students. You have done well with them." "I am tired, Miss Owens. My health is not what it was, and I find myself struggling to meet the demands of the position. The town council has been patient, but they know I need to retire. Would you consider taking the position?" The offer hung in the air. Margaret glanced at Nathan, who was watching her with an unreadable expression. "I have not decided if I am staying in New Mexico. I still have matters to settle." Of course. "But please think about it. We would be fortunate to have someone of your caliber." On the ride back to the ranch, Nathan was quiet. Finally, Margaret asked, "What are you thinking?" He glanced at her, then back at the road. "I am thinking that I have no right to influence your decision. You have a life in Boston, obligations, friends. And I am thinking that I would like you to stay, but I do not want to be selfish about it." "Why do you want me to stay?" Margaret's heart was beating fast, but she needed to hear him say it. Nathan pulled the wagon to a stop on the empty road and turned to face her fully. Because in the week you have been here, the ranch has felt more like a home than it has in years. Because I enjoy talking with you, working with you, just being near you. Because when I think about you leaving, I feel a tightness in my chest that I have not felt since my mother died." He paused, then added quietly, "Because I think I am falling in love with you, and I know a week is not nearly enough time for such feelings, but there it is. The truth." Margaret stared at him, her mind reeling. Everything she had planned, the tidy return to Boston, the resumption of her predictable life, suddenly seemed impossibly far away and utterly unimportant. "I think I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "And you are right. A week is not enough time, but I feel it anyway." Nathan reached out and took her hand. "Then stay. Not forever, not permanently, not yet. Just stay long enough to be sure. Stay through the summer. Get to know this place, this life. If by autumn you want to return to Boston, I will drive you to Santa Fe myself and wish you well. But if you decide to stay, I will count myself the luckiest man in New Mexico. What about the school? Mr. Hendricks needs an answer. Tell him you will take the position for a trial period, just through next spring. That gives him time to rest, and you time to decide if teaching here suits you. And it gives us time to see if what we are feeling is real or just the romance of a new place." Margaret squeezed his hand. "Yes, all right. I will stay through the summer and I will teach at the school." Nathan's smile was like sunrise, and he raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "Thank you. You will not regret it." They drove the rest of the way to the ranch holding hands, and that night, Margaret wrote a long letter to her friend Emma, trying to explain the strange and wonderful turn her life had taken. She wrote about Nathan, about the ranch, about the possibility of a future she had never imagined. She sealed the letter and left it on the table to post the next time someone went to town, and she felt like she was closing a door on her old life and opening a window onto something entirely new. The summer unfolded like a dream. Margaret moved into her aunt's house, spending her days fixing it up with Nathan's help. They replaced broken fence rails, weeded the garden, and got the chicken coop ready for a new flock. Nathan brought her 6 laying hens and a rooster, and Margaret found herself charmed by the silly birds and their constant clucking conversations. Cole helped her repair the barn, and Mrs. Davies came out one afternoon with her daughter Lucy to help clean and air out the house properly. "This place just needs life in it again," Mrs. Davies declared. "Sarah would be so happy to know you are here." Nathan was a constant presence, finding excuses to stop by even when he was needed elsewhere on his ranch. They would work side by side in companionable silence, or they would sit on the porch in the evening and talk about everything and nothing. He told her about his dreams for expanding the ranch, about his concerns over drought and cattle prices, about his hope that the railroad would eventually reach closer to Pinyon and open new markets. Margaret shared her experiences teaching, her frustration with the limited opportunities for women, her belief that education could change lives. Nathan listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions and never dismissing her ideas as frivolous or unimportant. One evening in late June, as they sat watching fireflies dance in the dusk, Nathan said, "I have been thinking about your school. The building in town is too small and poorly equipped. What if we built a proper schoolhouse halfway between town and the ranches? More children could attend, and we could make it big enough for a real classroom. That would cost a fortune. I have some money saved, and I bet other ranchers would contribute if they knew their children could get a better education without having to send them away. We could have a community school, something to be proud of." Margaret turned to him, seeing the excitement in his eyes, the vision taking shape. "You would do that, invest that much in education. I would do it for the community, and I would do it for you if it meant you would stay. Nathan. She reached for his hand. I am not going back to Boston. I have known that for weeks now. I am staying. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and they sat like that as darkness fell, two people who had found in each other something they had not even known they were searching for. In July, Margaret began preparing for the school year, which would start in September. Mr. Hendricks met with her several times to hand over his records and materials, clearly relieved and grateful. You are an answer to prayer, Miss Owens. I can retire in peace knowing the children are in capable hands. Margaret threw herself into planning lessons and organizing the small schoolhouse. She wrote to her colleagues in Boston requesting they send used textbooks and materials, and to her surprise, several responded with generous packages. Nathan built new desks and benches, and Cole painted the walls a cheerful yellow that made the room feel brighter and more welcoming. Throughout all of this, Margaret and Nathan's relationship deepened. They did not rush into anything physical beyond holding hands and occasional chaste kisses, both aware that in a small community, reputations mattered. But the emotional intimacy between them grew stronger each day, and Margaret had never felt more known, more understood, more cherished. In early August, Nathan asked her to accompany him to a community dance in Pinyon. Margaret wore her best dress, a rose-colored cotton with lace trim that she had not had occasion to wear since arriving in New Mexico. Nathan appeared at her door in clean denim pants, a white shirt and a string tie, his hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaven. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice slightly awed. "You clean up pretty well yourself." Margaret took his offered arm, and they rode into town in the wagon, talking and laughing. The dance was held in the largest barn in town, cleared out and decorated with lanterns and wildflowers. The whole community turned out, ranchers and townspeople alike, dressed in their finest and ready to celebrate. A fiddle, a guitar, and a harmonica provided the music, and soon the barn was alive with dancing and laughter. Nathan proved to be a good dancer, confident and smooth, leading Margaret through reels and waltzes with ease. They danced nearly every dance together, oblivious to the knowing looks and whispers of the other attendees. During a break in the music, the banker from town, Mr. Harrison, approached with his wife. "Mr. Quinn, Miss Owens, so good to see you both. We are all very excited that Miss Owens will be teaching this year. My two youngest will be in her class." "I am looking forward to it," Margaret said warmly. Mrs. Harrison leaned in conspiratorially. "We are all wondering when we might hear news of a wedding. You two make such a lovely couple." Margaret felt her cheeks flush, but Nathan just smiled. "When I have something to announce, Mrs. Harrison, you will be among the first to know." As they walked away, Margaret whispered, "Do people really think we are courting?" "We are courting, Margaret, or I thought we were. Have I misunderstood?" "No, I just did not realize it was so official, so public." Nathan stopped and turned to face her, serious now. "If you want to keep things quiet, I understand, but I am not ashamed of my feelings for you, and I have no desire to hide them. I am 33 years old, Margaret. I have waited a long time to find someone I want to build a life with. If that makes people talk, so be it." Margaret looked up at him, this good man who had opened his home and his heart to her, and felt a rush of love so strong it almost knocked the breath from her lungs. "I am not ashamed either. Let them talk." Nathan's answering smile was radiant, and he pulled her close for a brief kiss that made several nearby matrons gasp and giggle. Margaret laughed against his lips, feeling free and happy in a way she had never experienced before. The rest of the evening passed in a happy blur. They danced until Margaret's feet ached, ate cake and drank punch, and talked with neighbors who welcomed Margaret warmly into the community. By the time Nathan drove her home under a sky full of stars, Margaret felt like she truly belonged here, like she had found her place in the world. At her door, Nathan pulled her into his arms and kissed her properly, deeply, with a passion that made her knees weak. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Margaret Owens. I know I should wait longer to say it, but I cannot help it. I love you." "I love you too, Nathan Quinn. I think I have loved you since that first day when you stood on your porch and offered me kindness without asking for anything in return. Marry me." The words were soft but certain. "I know it is fast, but I am sure. Marry me, build a life with me here. Let me spend every day for the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you have made me." Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but they were joyful tears. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Nathan swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, he kissed her again, tender and sweet. "I will talk to the minister tomorrow. We can be married as soon as you want. Let us wait until after school starts. I want to get settled in with the students first, and I want your sister to be able to come. Can we send a telegram to Denver? Of course. We will do this properly with family and friends. But know that I would marry you tonight under the stars with only the coyotes as witnesses if you would have me." Margaret laughed and kissed him. "I would have you any way I could get you. But let us do it right. Let us have a wedding the community can celebrate with us." They set the date for the first Saturday in October, after the fall harvest, but before the weather turned too cold. Nathan sent a telegram to his sister Lydia the next day, and her response came back enthusiastically accepting the invitation and promising to arrive a week early to help with preparations. September arrived with cooler temperatures and golden aspens in the mountains. Margaret threw herself into teaching with passion and energy that surprised even her. The children were eager and responsive, and she loved the freedom to teach without the rigid constraints of the Boston school. Here, she could take her students outside to study nature, could adjust lessons to fit the needs of individual children, could make learning an adventure rather than a chore. Nathan stopped by the schoolhouse most afternoons to drive her home, and the children quickly figured out that their teacher was going to marry the rancher. The younger ones were charmed by the romance of it, and the older ones teased Margaret gently until she blushed and shooed them out to their chores. In the evenings, Margaret and Nathan would sit together planning their future. Nathan wanted her to keep teaching as long as she wanted, and he promised to hire help for her aunt's property so she would not be burdened with too much work. "Your aunt's house can be for guests, or we can rent it to a family who needs it," he suggested. "Or we can keep it as your private space, a place to go when you need quiet for grading papers or preparing lessons." "I want to live with you at the ranch," Margaret said firmly. "That house was Aunt Sarah's and I am grateful for it, but your ranch is our home, our future." "Our home," Nathan repeated and pulled her close. "I like the sound of that." Lydia arrived in late September with her husband George and their 2 children, a boy of 4 and a girl of 2. She was a petite woman with Nathan's dark hair and a quick laugh, and she embraced Margaret like they had known each other for years. "Thank God my brother finally found someone," she declared. "I was starting to think he would marry that ranch and die alone with only cattle for company." "I heard that," Nathan called from where he was helping George unload luggage. "You were meant to," Lydia turned back to Margaret. "But seriously, I am so happy. When Nathan wrote about you, I could hear something different in his words. He has always been too serious, too focused on work. You have brought joy back into his life." Over the next week, the ranch became a hub of activity as preparations for the wedding intensified. Mrs. Davies took charge of the food, recruiting women from town to help with cooking and baking. Cole and the ranch hands cleaned and decorated the barn for the reception. Margaret and Lydia went to Santa Fe for 2 days to shop for a wedding dress, a trip that became an adventure of laughter and bonding. Margaret chose a simple but elegant dress of cream-colored silk with lace sleeves and a modest train. It was more than she had ever spent on clothing, but Nathan had insisted she spare no expense, and Lydia had backed him up. "You only get married once," Lydia said firmly. "Well, hopefully only once, and you deserve to feel like a princess on your wedding day." The night before the wedding, Margaret stayed at the ranch house while Nathan moved into the bunkhouse, respecting the tradition of not seeing the bride before the ceremony. Margaret lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind full of the magnitude of what she was about to do. Tomorrow, she would become Nathan's wife, would bind her life to his forever. She thought about the girl who had arrived in New Mexico just 4 months ago, planning to stay 2 weeks and leave. That girl had been lonely without fully realizing it, had been going through the motions of living without truly feeling alive. Now, she could not imagine going back to that existence. Nathan had awakened something in her, some capacity for joy and passion and deep connection that she had not known she possessed. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Margaret, are you awake?" Lydia's voice came through the wood. "Yes, come in." Lydia entered in her nightgown, carrying a candle. "I could not sleep either. I thought you might want company." They settled on the bed together, and Lydia said, "I want you to know what you are doing for my brother. He has carried so much weight for so long, feeling responsible for keeping this ranch going, for preserving our father's legacy. He never complains, but I have watched him grow more and more isolated, more burdened. Since meeting you, he is lighter. He laughs more, smiles more. You have given him back a piece of himself he lost." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "He has done the same for me. I did not realize how small my life had become until I came here and saw what it could be. Then you are both blessed, and I am blessed to have you as a sister." Lydia squeezed her hand. "Now try to get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be wonderful but exhausting." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with a sky so blue it looked painted. Margaret dressed with Lydia and Mrs. Davies fussing over every detail, pinning her hair and arranging the lace veil that had belonged to Nathan's mother. "She would have loved you," Mrs. Davies said, dabbing at her eyes. "She always wanted Nathan to find someone strong enough to be his partner, not just his wife. And that is what you are." The ceremony took place in the small church in Pinon, packed with everyone from the surrounding ranches and the town. Margaret's hand trembled slightly as she took Nathan's arm and walked down the aisle, but when she looked at him and saw the absolute love and certainty in his eyes, her nerves settled. The minister, a kind man named Reverend Thompson, led them through the traditional vows. When it came time for Nathan to say, "I do," his voice rang out clear and strong. When Margaret said the same, she felt like she was not just committing to Nathan but to this whole new life, to this community, to this wild and beautiful land. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Nathan, you may kiss your bride." Nathan cupped Margaret's face in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness and joy that several women in the congregation sniffled and reached for handkerchiefs. When they finally pulled apart, they turned to face the assembled guests, and everyone erupted in applause and cheers. The reception in the barn lasted well into the night. There was more food than Margaret had ever seen in one place. Tables groaning under the weight of roasted meats, fresh breads, pies, cakes, and preserves. The same musicians from the dance played, and Margaret and Nathan led the first dance, then were joined by the whole community. At one point, Mr. Hendricks approached with a wrapped package. "A wedding gift for you both. Open it later." When they finally did, they found a beautiful leather-bound book with blank pages. Inside the cover, Mr. Hendricks had written, "For recording your life together. May you fill these pages with joy, adventure, and the stories you will tell your children someday." As the stars came out and the celebration continued, Nathan pulled Margaret aside to a quiet corner of the barn. "Are you happy? Happier than I have ever been. Happier than I knew was possible." "Good, because I intend to spend the rest of my life keeping you that happy." He kissed her forehead. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Quinn?" Margaret smiled at the sound of her new name. "Yes, let us go home." They slipped away from the party, riding back to the ranch in the wagon under a sky full of stars. The house was quiet, lit by lamps that Mrs. Davies had left burning in the windows. Nathan carried Margaret over the threshold, and they stood in the parlor, suddenly shy with each other despite everything. "I have something for you," Nathan said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small box and opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring with a small turquoise stone. "This was my mother's. She told me before she died to give it to the woman I married. She said it was blessed by a Pueblo elder, meant to bring protection and happiness. I want you to have it." Margaret's eyes filled with tears as Nathan slipped the ring onto her right hand, since her left already bore the simple gold wedding band they had exchanged in the church. "Thank you. I promise to honor her memory and to be worthy of this." "You already are." Nathan pulled her close and kissed her, and this kiss was different from all the ones before, deeper and more urgent, filled with promise and desire. Margaret responded with equal passion, her hands tangling in his hair as she pressed herself against him. They stumbled toward the stairs, pausing to kiss on each step, leaving a trail of his tie and her veil behind them. In the bedroom, they came together with a mixture of tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies, giving and receiving pleasure, and finally joining together as husband and wife in the most intimate way possible. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, Nathan's fingers tracing lazy patterns on Margaret's bare shoulder. "I love you," he murmured. "Thank you for staying, for taking a chance on this life on me. Thank you for making me want to stay. For showing me what love really means." Margaret snuggled closer. "I cannot imagine being anywhere else now." "Good, because you are stuck with me, Mrs. Quinn, for better or worse, until death do us part." "That sounds perfect to me." The early days of marriage were an adjustment but a joyful one. Margaret continued teaching, now riding to the schoolhouse each morning with lunch packed by Nathan, and returning each afternoon to a husband who greeted her with kisses and questions about her day. Nathan continued running the ranch but made sure to carve out time for Margaret, for quiet dinners and long talks and nights wrapped in each other's arms. Lydia and her family stayed for 2 weeks after the wedding, and Margaret treasured the time getting to know her new sister. The two women spent hours talking while the children played, and Lydia shared stories about Nathan's childhood, about the mother Margaret would never meet but whose presence she felt everywhere in the house. "Keep him happy," Lydia said the morning they prepared to leave for Denver. "He deserves someone who understands how rare and special he is." "I will. I promise." As the wagon carrying Lydia's family disappeared down the road, Nathan wrapped his arms around Margaret from behind. "Strange, is it not, how quickly our lives changed? 4 months ago you were a stranger. Now you are my wife, the center of my world. 4 months ago I was alone and did not even fully realize it. Now I have everything I never knew I needed." Margaret turned in his arms to face him. "I am so grateful the attorney's letter brought me here. I am grateful your aunt was kind to your mother. I am grateful for every coincidence that led me to you. Maybe it was not coincidence. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was." Margaret kissed him softly. Either way, I am exactly where I am supposed to be." The autumn passed in a golden haze of happiness. Margaret's school thrived, with more children enrolling as word spread about her teaching methods. Nathan made good on his promise to help build a new schoolhouse, organizing a community effort that brought ranchers and townspeople together for the construction. By November, a beautiful new building stood halfway between town and the Quinn Ranch, with room for 50 students and proper desks and blackboards. Winter came, bringing snow to the mountains and a slower pace to ranch life. Margaret and Nathan settled into comfortable domesticity, spending long evenings by the fire reading aloud to each other or working on projects. Nathan taught Margaret to knit, a skill his mother had taught him as a boy, and they laughed together at her clumsy first attempts before she got the hang of it. In January, Margaret began to suspect she was pregnant. She waited until she was certain before telling Nathan, wanting to surprise him properly. One evening after supper, she handed him a small wrapped package. "What is this? Open it and see." Nathan unwrapped the package to find a tiny pair of knitted booties, cream-colored and impossibly small. His eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Margaret, are you saying what I think you are saying? We are going to have a baby. Sometime in late summer, I think." Nathan let out a whoop of joy and swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughingly protested. "I am so happy I can hardly stand it. A baby, our baby." "Are you disappointed I will have to leave teaching for a while?" "Not even a little bit. Your health and the baby's health are what matter. The school will manage and you can return when you are ready." Nathan set her down gently and placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "Thank you for this gift. I cannot wait to meet our child." The pregnancy was mostly easy, though Margaret dealt with morning sickness for several weeks and tired more easily as her belly grew. Nathan was attentive and protective, sometimes overly so, hovering until Margaret had to laugh and shoo him away to his work. She taught through the spring, her expanding waistline becoming obvious to everyone. The children were thrilled, already planning what they would teach Miss Margaret's baby when he or she was old enough. Margaret arranged for a substitute teacher to take over in June, a young woman from Santa Fe who had just completed her own education and was eager for the opportunity. In August, after a long labor that terrified Nathan far more than it did Margaret, their son was born. He came into the world screaming lustily, with a cap of dark hair like his father and a determined expression that made even the midwife laugh. "He knows what he wants, this one," she declared, placing the cleaned and swaddled baby in Margaret's arms. Nathan stood beside the bed staring at his son with an expression of such wonder and love that Margaret felt tears stream down her face. "He is perfect," Nathan whispered. "You are both perfect. Do you want to hold him?" Nathan took the baby with exquisite care, cradling him against his chest. The infant quieted immediately, seeming to recognize his father's voice. "Hello, little one. I am your papa. And this is your mama, and we love you more than all the stars in the sky." They named him Samuel Nathan Quinn, after both grandfathers. Samuel proved to be a good baby, healthy and strong, with his mother's green eyes and his father's serious expression. Nathan was besotted, spending every free moment with his son, talking to him about the ranch and the horses and everything he would teach him when he was older. Margaret recovered quickly from the birth, and by September she had settled into the rhythm of motherhood. She loved these early months, nursing Samuel and watching him discover the world, seeing Nathan's face light up every time his son smiled or made a new sound. Lydia came to visit when Samuel was 3 months old, bringing her own children and pronouncing her nephew absolutely beautiful. She and Margaret sat together while the children napped, and Lydia said, Motherhood suits you. You are glowing." "I am happy," Margaret said simply. "Sometimes I wake up and cannot believe this is my life, that I almost went back to Boston and missed all of this. But you did not. You stayed. You took the risk, and look at everything you gained." Margaret looked around at the comfortable house, thought of Nathan out working with the cattle, of Samuel sleeping peacefully upstairs, of the school waiting for her whenever she chose to return, and knew Lydia was right. She had taken a risk on this wild, beautiful place and the man who called it home, and she had been rewarded beyond measure. The years rolled by in a pattern of seasons and growth. Samuel grew into a sturdy toddler, then a curious little boy who followed his father everywhere, learning about cattle and horses and the land. Margaret returned to teaching when Samuel was 2, bringing him to the schoolhouse where he would sit quietly coloring while she taught, already learning his letters from listening to his mother's lessons. When Samuel was 3, Margaret became pregnant again. This time they had a daughter, Emma Lydia Quinn, born in the spring with her mother's chestnut hair and her father's serious gray eyes. She was a more challenging baby than Samuel had been, fussy and particular, but Nathan adored her even more fiercely if that was possible. "She knows what she wants and will not settle for less," he said, walking the floor with her at 2 in the morning while Margaret tried to catch a few hours of sleep. "She is like her mother that way." The ranch prospered as Nathan implemented new breeding programs and management techniques. He built up one of the best herds in New Mexico territory, and buyers came from as far as Denver to purchase his cattle. The money allowed him to expand the house, adding more bedrooms and a proper parlor, and to hire more help so that Margaret would never be overwhelmed with work. True to his word, Nathan ensured that Margaret could continue teaching for as long as she wanted. They hired a young Mexican woman named Rosa to help with the children and the house, and Rosa became part of the family, beloved by the children and trusted by Margaret and Nathan. In 1889, when Samuel was 6 and Emma 3, Margaret discovered she was pregnant once more. This pregnancy was harder than the first 2, and she had to stop teaching earlier than she wanted. But in December, they welcomed twin boys, James and Thomas, identical down to the tiny cowlick on the left side of their heads. 4 children, Nathan marveled, holding a twin in each arm while Samuel and Emma peered at their new brothers with fascination. "We are truly blessed, Margaret." "We are," she agreed, though she was exhausted and overwhelmed. "Though I think 4 might be enough," Nathan laughed. "I am happy with whatever we have. As long as I have you, everything else is extra blessing." The 1890s brought changes to New Mexico. The railroad pushed closer, eventually reaching a town just 20 miles from Piñon. Barbed wire began appearing on some ranches, though Nathan resisted it, preferring open range. The territory grew and developed, and there was talk of eventual statehood, though that seemed far off still. Through it all, Margaret and Nathan's love deepened and matured. They learned to work together through challenges, whether it was a difficult calving season, a drought that threatened their water supply, or the ordinary struggles of raising 4 active children. They had arguments, of course, disagreements about decisions both large and small, but they always came back together, always chose each other, always remembered the foundation of love and respect on which their marriage was built. Samuel grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Emma proved to be brilliant in school, with a particular talent for mathematics that Margaret nurtured. The twins were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and communicating in ways no one else quite understood. Margaret continued teaching until 1895, when she was 37, and decided she wanted to focus on her own family and perhaps write about her experiences. She had kept detailed journals over the years, filling the book Mr. Hendricks had given them as a wedding gift, and several more besides. She thought there might be value in sharing her story, in showing other women that it was possible to find happiness and purpose in unexpected places. Nathan encouraged her, as he encouraged everything she wanted to do. "You have a gift with words," he said. "Share it with the world." On their 10th anniversary, Nathan took Margaret back to the spot where he had first told her he loved her, the place on the road between the ranch and town where their lives had irrevocably intertwined. They stood holding hands, older now, marked by the years of hard work and child-rearing, but still deeply in love. "Do you ever regret it?" Nathan asked. "Choosing this life, giving up Boston and the opportunities you might have had there?" Margaret turned to face him, cupping his weathered cheek in her hand. "Not for a single moment. This life with you, with our children on this land, it is everything I never knew I needed. You made temporary permanent, and I will be grateful for that every day for the rest of my life. I am the grateful one. You took a chance on a lonely rancher and his isolated ranch. You brought life and love and laughter back into a house that had been quiet for too long." Nathan pulled her close. "I love you more now than I did 10 years ago, and I did not think that was possible." "I love you too. Always." They kissed there in the open air, under the vast New Mexico sky, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life that exceeded both their dreams. The turn of the century came with celebration and hope. Samuel, now 17, was clearly destined to take over the ranch someday, though Nathan was still strong and healthy at 48. Emma, 14, had announced her intention to become a teacher like her mother, and Margaret was already planning to help her with her education. The twins, 10 now and still inseparable, were both showing talent with horses and talked about starting their own breeding program someday. Margaret, at 42, felt the aches and pains of middle age, but also the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. She had published a small book about her experiences that had been surprisingly well received, leading to correspondence with women across the country who wrote to thank her for her honesty and encouragement. Nathan, at 48, had gray threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But he was still strong and vital, still the man who made Margaret's heart skip when he walked into a room. On a warm evening in June of 1900, the entire Quinn family gathered on the porch of the ranch house, joined by Mrs. Davies, now elderly but still sharp, and Cole, who had become like an uncle to the children. They watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, the same view Margaret had fallen in love with 17 years ago. "Tell us the story again, Mama," Emma asked. "About how you and Papa met." Margaret smiled, settling back in her rocking chair with Nathan's arm around her shoulders. "I arrived as a temporary guest on this ranch," she began, her voice warm with memory. "I planned to stay 2 weeks, settle my aunt's affairs, and return to Boston, but your father had other plans." "I made sure temporary became permanent," Nathan finished, squeezing her close. Samuel laughed. "Papa, you always say it like you had a choice. Mama says she decided to stay." "We both decided," Margaret said firmly. "We chose each other, chose this life, chose love. And that choice made all the difference." As darkness fell and the stars came out one by one, the family remained on the porch, talking and laughing, held together by love, and the choices two people had made 17 years before. Margaret looked at her husband, her children, her life, and felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude. She had come to New Mexico territory as a young woman alone in the world, planning a brief visit before returning to a life that had felt increasingly empty. Instead, she had found a home, a purpose, and a love that transformed everything. The ranch that had seemed so foreign at first had become the center of her world, the place where she belonged. Nathan caught her looking at him and smiled, that same smile that had captured her heart all those years ago. Without words, they communicated everything they needed to say. I love you, I choose you, I am grateful for every day we have together. The children's voices faded to background music as Margaret and Nathan sat together under the stars, still in love, still choosing each other, still grateful for the day she had arrived as a temporary guest, and he had made sure temporary became permanent. Their story, which had begun with a dusty stagecoach arrival and uncertain futures, had become a legacy of love, family, and the courage to embrace the unexpected. Years continued to pass, each one adding new chapters to their story. Samuel married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property, a sensible young woman named Catherine who fit into the family as if she had always been there. They built a house on Quinn land and began working alongside Nathan, preparing for the day when Samuel would take over the ranch completely. Emma pursued her dream of teaching, attending normal school in Santa Fe and returning to Pinyon to teach at the very schoolhouse her mother had helped establish. She had her mother's gift with students and her father's steadiness, and she became beloved in the community. The twins, true to their word, established a successful horse breeding operation on a portion of the ranch Nathan gifted them. They specialized in sturdy, intelligent horses perfect for ranch work, and their reputation spread throughout New Mexico and beyond. Nathan and Margaret became grandparents multiple times over, delighting in Samuel and Catherine's children, and eventually in grandchildren from Emma and the twins as well. The ranch house was frequently full of multiple generations, loud and chaotic, and exactly what Nathan and Margaret had dreamed of during those early days when they were just beginning to build their life together. In 1907, 24 years after Margaret first arrived in New Mexico, Nathan took her hand one evening and said, "Come with me. I want to show you something." He led her out to the corral where a beautiful mare stood, chestnut with a white blaze, the granddaughter of Juniper, the filly they had trained together all those years ago. "I have been working with her for months, getting her ready. She is yours, Margaret. I wanted you to have a horse from Juniper's line, a reminder of where we started." Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she stroked the mare's soft nose. "What is her name?" "I have been calling her Hope. Because that is what you brought into my life, what you have given me every day since you decided to stay. Hope for the future, hope for happiness, hope that life could be everything I had dreamed." Margaret turned and wrapped her arms around her husband, this man who still found ways to surprise and delight her after nearly a quarter-century of marriage. "I love you, Nathan Quinn. You are the best decision I ever made. And you are mine." They stood together in the fading light, surrounded by the empire they had built together, not just of land and cattle but of family and love and commitment. The temporary guest had become a permanent fixture, the lonely rancher had become a devoted husband and father, and together they had created something beautiful and lasting. When Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1923 at the age of 65, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, Nathan held her hand and whispered, "Thank you for staying. Thank you for choosing me, for choosing this life. I have been blessed beyond measure." Margaret's last words, barely audible, were, "I would choose you again, 1,000 times over." Nathan lived 5 more years, long enough to see his great-grandchildren born, long enough to pass the ranch fully to Samuel and watch him run it with the same dedication Nathan had shown. He spent his final years telling stories about Margaret to anyone who would listen, keeping her memory alive, ensuring that everyone knew about the remarkable woman who had arrived as a temporary guest and transformed his entire world. When Nathan died in 1928 at the age of 76, he was laid to rest beside Margaret on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the vast New Mexico sky they had both loved. His children and grandchildren gathered for the funeral, along with what seemed like half of New Mexico territory, testament to the life he and Margaret had built together. On their shared headstone, Samuel had inscribed the words that best captured their story. She arrived as a temporary guest. He made sure temporary became permanent. Together, they built a legacy of love. The Quinn Ranch continued through the generations, each one adding their own chapter to the family story, but never forgetting the foundation laid by Nathan and Margaret. Their letters, journals, and the book Margaret had written were preserved and treasured, passed down so that future generations would know the story of how their family began. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew across the New Mexico grasslands and the stars came out over the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, some claimed they could still feel the presence of Nathan and Margaret, two souls who had found each other against all odds and created something eternal, proving that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a single choice to stay, to take a chance, to believe in the possibility of love. Their story became legend in Piñon and beyond, a reminder that home is not always where you start but often where you choose to stay, that family is built through commitment and love, and that sometimes the temporary moments in life become the permanent treasures we carry forever in our hearts.